Good morning or afternoon, wherever you may be joining us from today. My name is Charity Counts, and I'm the Executive Director of the Association of Midwest Museums. AMM is located in Indianapolis, Indiana, the ancestral homelands of the Miami, Delaware, Potawatomi, Shawnee, Wee, and Kickapoo communities. I'm joining you from my home office in Fishers, Indiana. I would like to offer a visual description of myself today and my space for those of you who may not be able to see me. I am a fair-skinned white woman with dark brown shoulder-length hair and dark eyes. I'm wearing a Proud Museum Person t-shirt and my yellow leather jacket. My office is indigo blue colored and has white doors and a white chair. And behind me is a painting of a woman holding her head in her hand. Thank you for joining us for the first Lunchtime Leadership Chat this month as part of the Mutual of America Museum Leadership Series. Our goal with this series is to connect museum leaders in a variety of roles to each other around topics that are most assuredly in your minds right now, perhaps as a result of the past year or at any given moment otherwise. We are grateful for the support and thought leadership of our friends at Mutual of America, without whom this series would not be possible. I'm going to unmute everyone for a quick moment, for a quick round of applause, or at least I think I can invite all of you to unmute and join me in an applause and thanking our friends from Mutual of America for hosting and supporting this great event. Thank you. The focus of today's chat is talent recruitment and retention. We will start with a quick round of introductions of our panelists today and then dive into a conversation about strategies for recruiting, developing, supporting, and retaining talent. This session is hosted in Zoom meeting for a reason, so that you can join the conversation at any point in a manner comfortable to you. You can submit questions or comments in the chat. And I mentioned at the start here, you can also introduce yourselves in the chat if you haven't already. You can also join the conversation with audio or video. For that option, all I ask is that you raise your hand using the option in your menu. I think in the reactions button, you can choose raise hand. That alerts me to make sure that you're unmuted and to call on you so that we don't interrupt the presenters today. But I definitely invite you to join, via audio or video if that's easier or better for you to enter the conversation. We fully welcome that. We have enabled Zoom's live transcription feature. So to turn this on or off, you click the CC button in the menu at the bottom of your screen. We also have an ASL interpreter with us today. Zoom allows each viewer to pin the interpreter to a standard location on their screen. To do this, right-click on the ASL interpreter's video and select Pin Video. I also have her spotlighted, which may keep her on screen for you at all times anyway, but just in case, the Pin Video option is available. We are recording today's chat to share with participants who could not join us live and to help us compile a list of key takeaways afterward, both of which we will make available as a resource for all series participants. Okay, I think that's it for logistics today. Let's get started with those introductions. Andy, Brian, and Trevor, I'm just gonna have you go in that order. You can start introducing yourselves.
Hi, everyone. My name is Andy Treinen. I am the president and CEO at the Frazier History Museum in Louisville, Kentucky. It is an honor to be on the program today.
Thank you, everybody. My name is Brian Sharrow. I'm the Vice President of Operations here for Mutual of America out of our Detroit office that covers the great state of Michigan and Northwest Ohio.
Thank you, and good afternoon and good morning, everyone. My name is Trevor Koenig. I'm our Vice President, Mutual of America, covering our Ohio operations for us, and honored to be on the call with you today.
Great, thanks, guys. Before we get into the conversation about our topic today, I thought it would be a good idea for Andy to provide a little bit of a background on the Frazier, just so everybody understands what his museum's all about and how big it is, et cetera. So Andy, you want to share your screen?
Yeah, sure, Charity. Thank you. And again, hello, everyone. This is my second career really here as the president and CEO at the Frazier History Museum. Before that, I was the director of marketing here, but I was hired in that job in 2015. Before that, I spent 25 years in television, in sports in Cincinnati, and then a morning anchor in Milwaukee and Louisville before taking on this job. I'll share my screen. The Frazier History Museum is where the world meets Kentucky. So our position is really a starting place for tourism in the state of Kentucky. This is our website. There you see where the world meets Kentucky. That's my backside there, if you're interested, standing next to my daughter, looking at the picture of Diane Sawyer, who is from Kentucky. But we got a designation in 2018 as the official starting point of the Kentucky Bourbon Trail, because bourbon tourism is huge in the state of Kentucky. And that gave us a brand outside of Louisville and outside of the state of Kentucky for people to come here. We started getting a whole bunch of visitors in that were coming into the museum store, into the Kentucky Bourbon Trail Welcome Center, but not necessarily coming into the museum. So we opened this new exhibit called Cool Kentucky. And it's basically a starting place for tourism in the state of Kentucky, because we have little snippets, little displays that feature every other museum in the state, and every other, let's see if I can pull that up there. So that's what it looks like at the beginning. There's a Corvette. Of course, the only place Corvettes are made in the world is in Bowling Green, Kentucky. You learn that, it inspires you to maybe want to go to Bowling Green. That's Heather French Henry's Miss America dress there. She's the only Kentucky-born Miss America. So that's her dress and her crown. That boat back there is Tori Murdens, who is the first woman to ever row across the Atlantic Ocean. She happens to also be the president at Spalding University. So those are some of the stories we tell. And we, again, have the brand where the world meets Kentucky. Now, we exist in a 100,000 square foot facility, right? And $14 is our admission. There's no way in the world that a $14 admission at a museum is enough to pay for the costs of running a museum of this size. Sometimes our LG&E bill, our electric bill, can be $20,000 in a month's time. So we had to find a lot of ways to generate revenue. So we're really 6 different businesses. We're admissions. We have a parking lot that we manage. We have a museum store. We have education with camps and field trips. We have a development department, which is fundraising. And then we have a facility rental department, because this is a beautiful building with great photography. And we do as many as 120 weddings a year. And we use this as a facility rental place. We have about March of 2020, all that stopped. It all shut down. We had 40 employees and no way to generate revenue with any of those 6 businesses. And that's kind of how we landed in a very difficult position as a museum, with staff that we wanted to keep on board, but no way to generate revenue.
Great, thanks, Andy. Of the 40 employees, how many are full-time?
29 are full-time. Part-time employees is seasonal. Obviously, we're in busy time now, or wrapping up busy time. Summer is go time, and the holidays, Christmas holidays, go time as well in museum business.
Great. Well, I'm going to ask you our first question of the day today. You were able to secure PPP loans during the pandemic, which helped your museum maintain its staffing levels as of March last year, right? And you shared during our prep call that some did choose to leave, though, and that spurred a conversation in our planning meeting about your philosophy about talent retention and the importance of positive workplace culture. Do you mind elaborating on that for our colleagues here today?
Sure. I mean, we're a nonprofit, and I'm not naive. I know that we can't possibly compete with for-profits if our employees, our talented employees, start looking for employment elsewhere. We can just plain be outspent by other for-profit businesses. So my philosophy is always to make people happy and make them not look, make them content to be where they are now. Fortunately, for the first time in modern history, this new generation of hires doesn't have money as the primary and only concern for when they're looking for work. Benefits are very important. and additional benefits are very important to the young staff of workers out there. So we try to win that. We try to create an environment that is fun and enjoyable. One of the first things I did was create a social squad. We do a lot of committees here because we don't have a huge staff. So I like committees to work on getting things in place. So our social squad recognizes all birthdays and anniversaries, and they send notes and they send little gifts, and they plan our staff meetings, so they're much more engaging than other staff meetings. We do all kinds of employee recognition. We have a lunchtime cornhole tournament that's a round robin, and people can take their lunch and go play who they're scheduled to play against the next time. There are several employees who will bring their dog to work. We just try to be as creative as we possibly can, Charity, and not having people start looking for other opportunities that are out there.
That's great. I love the cornhole tournament idea.
You don't want to play me in cornhole now. I'm from Cincinnati. I didn't pick a game that I'm bad at.
It's very Midwestern too.
Yeah.
I love that. We did get a quick question in the chat. I just want to make sure we jump to it before we forget. What was your pre-COVID annual operating budget?
Around $2,600,000. There have been a bunch of variables during COVID that have changed things. PPP, we had a collection here. This museum was originally an arms museum. Our founder, Owsley Brown Frazier, started this museum in 2004 as an arms museum. So we had a lot of incredible historic weapons. He changed it to a history museum, but a lot of the collection didn't match our new brand, Where the World Meets Kentucky. So we were in an evolution process of changing the collection to match the stories that we told inside. So we also generated some revenue through that collection.
Oh, well. Okay, so I want to go back to this idea of workplace culture. But thanks for taking that side question there for a little bit of background. And I feel like this question is good for all of you, Andy, Brian, and Trevor. I think many museums and nonprofits emphasize their missions and the fun work that they do, maybe the fun places that you would be able to work at with them, and workplace culture in the hiring process. As they try to recruit, draw great talent to the roles that are available. This is especially considering the fact that the nonprofit world is not known for having, great wages. And Andy already mentioned maybe not as competitive as for profits. In your experience or that of your nonprofit partners, how can mission and workplace culture be an asset in the recruitment process?
If you like, I'll jump in, Charity. Again, Brian, sure, I'll give Andy a moment to catch his breath there for a second. But what we find is that the mission really does drive a lot of the attraction for talent. That old saying, love what you do, never work a day in your life, I think really appeals to especially that younger generation that is not necessarily financially driven on a dollar for dollar day-to-day standpoint. They're looking at coming in, providing some value to the organization and making a cultural difference. And again, back to Andy's comments on culture and finding creative and new ways to appeal to the younger generation and next generation is very critical for attracting new and young talent to the workforce.
And I just echo that, and just to share something as well about the culture at Mutual of America is, even though we're a financial services company working with organizations with their retirement plans, obviously a little different than museums. We have multiple museums that we work with on their retirement plans and things like that. But we were actually created and founded to serve the retirement plan needs of nonprofit and social service and cultural institutions. So it's in our DNA to operate more like, a museum or a nonprofit would be than necessarily some of the other financial services firms that you see out there. So culture is definitely a big part of what we do. And so that I think pairs well and helps us understand what our clients are going through, the museums and all the other nonprofits that we work with.
Thanks, Trevor. I'll add just we did a couple of things right away when we got hit with the pandemic. Number one, we knew we had to mean more to more people at the other side of the pandemic than we did going into it. So we created a content and a communication team, which was responsible for taking the stories that we tell inside here and getting it out to the public. We were doing it originally every day. It's now delivered once a week, every Monday morning. It's called the Virtual Frazier Magazine. It now goes to over 40,000 people. We never had a day where we speak to 40,000 people inside the museum. So we're growing as a new museum. We don't have generational funding because, again, we were just founded in 2004. The second thing we did was we launched, this is the home of Breonna Taylor. There were a lot of social justice issues going on throughout downtown Louisville, right on Main Street. So on the back side of some of that, through much change, we also launched a free membership campaign to try to expand our audience to mean more to neighborhoods and areas we haven't necessarily meant something to before, and to inspire people to come back downtown. So we have 23,000 new members with a free membership that extends through the end of October this year. Our next step, thank you. Our next step will be to try to generate and turn those into longtime supporters of the museum. But we founded and started a diversity, equity, and inclusion committee, and now we're working on hiring and reaching the right audiences. And because when we get people to come to the museum, if they don't see themselves inside in some way, they're not going to come back. So we're trying to diversify the stories we're telling and the perspective of those stories. It's no secret that museums have traditionally been, white, affluent places. That's the audience that has visited museums traditionally for a lot of very good reasons. But we're trying to expand upon that.
Well, thanks, Andy. That's a really good point. I want to come back to that in a moment. But first, I want to mention a phrase that Brian, you used, the making a difference. This idea of being able to make a difference. I feel like is that a selling point for nonprofits and even museums and the recruitment process when you talk about mission? Are you talking about the ways that they're going to make a difference in the lives of the people who are coming, or the individuals connected to the organization?
I think that's appropriate for whether it's a museum or an organization like Mutual of America. So many of our employees that when they're interviewing, and when I hire and bring somebody on, and our employees that are on our staff do want to make a difference and help people with their retirement, make sure that they can work 30, 40 years and then they have something there for when they retire, similar to those who, whether they work in the education department at a museum, or the curator or whatever department they're in, is making a difference and helping people see whether it's the type of history museum that helps educate, or it's just more of a fun type of experience like some of the science museums and things like that, but really making a difference for children or adults so they can see different things and experience different things out there. And I think that applies any type of organization.
To build off of that, making a difference is a huge impact. To another phrase, former college athlete, sorry, I got all these phrases, but knowledge is power, and getting into and understanding historical facts and data and information to, again, share that diversity and how that's been looked upon and acted upon, not just now, but why hasn't more diversity been included in museums in the past? Why did it take, the circumstances that have surrounded 2020 to have such a light shined onto those topics? I think to have that younger generation coming in, looking to make a difference, asking those questions has been critical for that evolution of how everybody is looking at their businesses and how they can apply that to the communities that we live and work in.
Oh, that's interesting. And Andy, as you've had to hire new positions or fill positions that maybe were vacated during the pandemic, how have you brought the work that you're doing to make changes into those conversations?
Well, the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Committee is targeted like 4 different things. And one of them is in expanding our hiring. There are a lot of places that are going, look, we're not getting diverse candidates, and that's legitimate. Sometimes you can't hire diverse candidates if you're not getting diverse candidates who are applying for the jobs. So we had to start with looking at who are we approaching, where are we posting jobs, and we've expanded that to include some places that we weren't posting before, to make sure that we're getting diverse candidates, and in replacing some of the positions of people who left for their own reasons during the pandemic. We hired a Latin woman from Peru who was the shortest ever U.S. Olympian. She is our preparator. She's a basketball player who's about 5'1". We've hired a marketing manager named LaPrecious Brewer, LP Brewer. She is incredibly talented and has been a huge addition to our staff. And you know, we struggle like everybody does. Is like I don't want to hire to a quota, to a number. I just want to make sure that we're interviewing, that we're seeing a lot of diverse candidates in the application process, and that we're interviewing them. And then we have found some tremendous talent through those processes.
That's great. A quick follow-up question related to that from the chat. Can you give us an example of where you are posting in non-traditional places?
Yes, we Handshake for schools, which gets us into U of L, Bellarmine, IU Southeast, Simmons, and Spalding. Some of those are colleges. They're not the biggest name colleges. A couple of them are more diverse colleges. So that Handshake gets us into all of those areas. We also use the traditional Indeed and post on our website. And then the Metro United Way has some programs that support diverse hiring.
Great suggestions there. Is Handshake a national service, or is it?
Yeah, it's a platform.
Okay. I've never heard of it before. I don't know if everybody else.
I didn't either until our HR manager pointed me in that direction. The other thing is, no one person knows all these things. We're coming upon them through our diverse staff. We're engaging them when we say, hey, we want to speak to more people. Where did you start looking for jobs? So I saw in the chat there was one question about the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Committee and whether we had outside representation on that. We have an outside representation on all of our exhibits now, on almost everything that we do. That committee is met probably about 8 times right now. It represents our staff and our board, but one of our 4 initiatives is to find talent from outside of the organization to serve on that board.
That's great. There was one other question that came in through the chat just before we get off the topic of culture and mission and that sort of that aspect of the recruitment process. How can museums better highlight their mission in recruitment? The note here is it can be pretty opaque to those not familiar with nonprofit work or specifically museum work. Any thoughts about that?
I feel like I'm answering too many questions. But, can you repeat again?
So the question was, how can we best highlight our mission in recruitment? Because it can be pretty opaque for anybody not familiar.
Yeah, I mean, and that is definitely a consideration. People don't know who you are. We have little cards. I don't know that they do anything that have our core values on them, and they have our mission on them, and they have our brand on them, and employees use it, if nothing else, as a little elevator speech. But when we introduce people as new employees, potential employees to the museum, we put them through little homework assignments. And that's how we came upon the great candidates that I just mentioned to you. We had 3 candidates and we asked them to visit the museum, and then we asked them to visit some galleries. We asked them to offer some feedback. We asked on the marketing side, make some social media posts, make a one sheet. How would you promote this exhibit? And we actually completely flipped on our 1, 2, and 3 candidate based on the assignments that they were given after the second round of interviews to complete. So I think just by getting, and that's a process with 3 or 4 people, a part of the hiring process, they're getting to know us, they're getting to know what's important about the museum through those interactions and those little homework assignments.
To support what Andy is saying, several of our clients that we work with have done some very similar approaches to their hiring processes, to where it's almost like submitting almost like a business plan, if you will. If you are hired into this position, what would you be looking at implementing? What strategies would you have? Can you give us some past experiences of where you've come across these types of bottlenecks or constraints that we're facing in this particular role that we're looking at overcoming? And they've put together a little bit more of how they would approach it, what they've done in the past to overcome those challenges. And in this virtual experience, it just gives a really nice roadmap for those to continue that conversation and how they would potentially implement those types of strategies at their future employer, if so selected.
So those assignments that you're both talking about are really about getting their perspective on the mission, right? Kind of understanding what they see, what they're seeing when they.
Sure, they come in multiple different forms for us. And if we're doing a good job of expressing our mission through the work that is being done in our galleries and the storytelling that's done in our galleries, they're going to pick up on that and highlight it.
Okay.
And the feedback that I've been received is it's really about a lot of folks that would come into a particular position would give feedback with, well, I didn't know I was going to be doing this, right? I didn't understand that the job entailed part of that, right? So this really allows them to kind of open the hood, so to say, to really kind of check out what exactly is part of that job, to where if they gave a business plan or some sort of strategy to the employer and it has everything to do with marketing and nothing to do with operations, maybe that's not the right position for that person, though that their talent is not in question. So maybe it's something about, if there's multiple positions opening, you would go back to that candidate and say, hey, everything that you said here is great, but it doesn't really apply for this particular position. You should check out this position, and this might be more up your alley from a talent and ability standpoint.
Well, speaking of the interview process, I imagine interviewing people this past year has been a little bit different than usual. And Trevor, I know that during our planning conversation, you were talking a little bit about, the hiring process during the pandemic has been challenging, particularly in getting across workplace culture and getting to know people, and from, your conversations with the nonprofits that you work with. I didn't know if you wanted to elaborate on that a bit today, share any tips that you've heard.
Yeah, certainly. Thanks, Charity. Yeah, from a personal perspective, I was going through the hiring process right when the pandemic hit and all the states started to shut down in March of last year. So I had to, quickly pivot to all of my first round interviews and the entire interview process to being virtual, which was certainly a unique experience because the way we do business at Mutual of America has been historically all in person, face-to-face interaction. So that's certainly unique, and getting comfortable quickly, and adapting is a big part, which I think everybody has certainly done over the last 18 months. And then also on the flip side, I just brought somebody on board to the organization where, just this past week, and it's all, back to in-person, interviewing and hiring and things like that. So it certainly changes the perspective there. But one thing that we do, and one thing I've, heard from clients as well in terms of the culture of an organization and through the hiring process, is getting staff involved. not just having the hiring manager being the one, interviewing them and then going up to, the CEO or the next level up to sign off on the hire, but to have multiple people involved in the process, people who are going to be their counterparts, people who might work under them. That way they can really see the types of people they're working with. They'll see the culture of the organization, the types of people that work there. And I think that applies for both us and a lot of the clients that we work with that I've talked to, is to give a full picture of the organization. They need to interview with multiple different people, in multiple different departments of the organization, whether that's at Mutual of America or at a museum or another nonprofit institution, to really get the full picture of the culture and what it's like to be a part of that team.
That's a great tip. Thanks, Trevor. Andy, I have a question for you next. This is kind of switching us over to a slightly different topic in this process of, recruitment and hiring and supporting and developing staff, retaining staff. Once someone has been hired at your museum, how do you ensure that their success? What support systems are in place for them? And you already mentioned some of the great, special programming that you're doing internally with your social squad, but what else are you doing to ensure their success?
Well, Trevor's a step ahead of us, because a lot of the things that he just mentioned in the hiring process, we're doing through onboarding and through the early weeks of an employee's career here at the Frazier. First they get to meet with everyone. They get to meet with every director, individual meetings where they learn a little bit about who you are and what you are. We're a relatively small staff, so that they get put onto some of these committees where they get to have a voice. So our virtual Frazier magazine that goes out to, like I said, 40,000 people, that features articles and contributions and videos from everyone, not people who work in marketing, not people who work in curatorial. Our facility rentals people will post things on there. We have a content meeting. Ours is at 2 o'clock today, to talk about what's going to be in the next edition, where people are in their articles. Some of it comes from, my news background and my director of community engagement, Rachel Platt, is also a longtime news person. And when this pandemic hit, we knew how to do that. We knew how to get together a team, create content, and deliver content, because we did that for a long time. And we weren't, or I wasn't, frankly, burdened by having 15 years of a history of knowing how to do things a certain way. So it was a lot easier for me to just pivot and recreate how we were going to deliver and what we were going to do. So I think when people come on board and they get to interact with the entire staff immediately, they get to change and build their network. And we're not perfect. We make mistakes in this. Sometimes we'll have smaller groups that work together only and don't, maybe their person isn't in that same office with them or on the same floor with them. Maybe their person works downstairs in education. And through this process of getting everybody involved in the content and meetings and being together and a part of the solution process, they find their person quicker and find a support system here at the museum a little quicker.
And how does professional development fit into the mix as far as support, and development of staff?
I would like to tell you it is far more advanced than it is, to be honest with you. But and we do support professional development in many of our, going away to seminars, conferences, those kind of things when they apply. But to be completely honest, Charity, oftentimes we'll lose an employee. We'll have 2 weeks to try to find a replacement for the employee, and we'll have somebody who kind of knows what the person did. And so we try to give them support as much as possible. The positive side to not having a force of 4 or 5 people that know exactly what that person did and how they did their job is that it allows us to hire creative, smart people and let them define the job for themselves. They're a part of the overall team. They're getting a lot of feedback. They're getting a lot of cues from everyone about what works and what doesn't. But, that works for some jobs better than others. Some things you have to know how to transport data if you're studying the new membership group or whatever. So sometimes in the transition, we have that right now where we had a contractor who was working for us for a little bit, and we lost somebody in membership who controlled all the data. This is all of our donor data, and our member data, and people who are coming to the museum. And the person who controlled that gave 2 weeks and was leaving. So we had a contract worker who happened to be here available to us that we can hire in the short term as a contract worker to get us through a transition phase. He already understood all that. He's actually a candidate for the job now and may want it. But I wish I could tell you we professionally developed at the way some of these major corporations do. We just don't have the staff to do it that way.
Well, I'm just curious as kind of a follow-up to that, and I definitely want to come to give Brian and Trevor a chance to chime in here in a moment. But the committees that you've formed, right, and your staff to do a variety of different positions, I'm sure some sort of mentoring or leadership experience starts to kind of fold into that process. Just as somebody who leads a lot of committees myself, I know it happens. So I don't know if you look at that at all as some of the development offerings for your team, or?
Yeah, no question. It's a great point. And absolutely, that's crucial to making that system work. And it's shocking. You'll be surprised. Sometimes when you're working out of your boxes and we were way too siloed for a little while here at the museum a while back. And through breaking out of those silos, you'll find a skill set in somebody that you'll just like, what? And you'll have no idea because it wasn't their defined job. So yeah, exposing to people through committees and getting people to weigh in. We used to use the predictive index in hiring. I don't know if anybody uses that, but it is, I have a certain skill set and I don't need another one of me. I need somebody who can, has a different skill set and that can kind of manage some of my weaknesses. And we also learned through that the quietest person in the room may be the smartest person in the room. And sometimes they're going to, after a meeting like that, somebody needs to go put their arm around and say, what do you think about that? And make sure you get their input.
Is that you? Yeah. Yeah, go ahead. You're welcome to sit in here. I don't mind. But you can sit outside too.
Yeah. One moment. There we go. I think somebody was accidentally unmuted. Sorry about that. Well, thanks, Andy. I don't know, Brian and Trevor, thinking about the nonprofits that you work with, are you aware of sort of trends and how those organizations are sort of building in professional development and their sort of, support structure for new hires?
Yeah, certainly. I think it kind of depends on the type of organization or institution, because I know not every nonprofit is the same, depending on the market that they serve. Obviously might be a little different than, in the museum space. But I know a lot of industries in the nonprofit sector have required CE, continuing education credits and things like that. So, we're at a lot of conferences with our clients where they're getting their CE and things like that. So, professional development is a big part of that, the ongoing learning, new trends and things like that. And, I'd anticipate it being similar on the museum space, to find out, what's new in the industry and things like that. And that's certainly a big part of what we do internally at Mutual of America with professional development and new designations and certifications and things like that for our staff. I've always found and seen from talking to clients that their employees always want to do more, to be better, to improve themselves. And so, we found for Mutual of America, and I found a lot of my clients, is any opportunity they can find for professional development is huge. But like was indicated, sometimes it can be challenging to find those right times for that.
I see.
To build off of some of the other comments, all great comments by both Andy and Trevor, I think it's also important to have great communication around what it is that person's intent. Is this just quote unquote a job for this person, or is it a career? And if you're looking at it from a career standpoint, are they proactively coming and discussing what advancements they could be doing, and you're in turn sharing where they could potentially benefit themselves from cross-job functionalization, for example, learning how to do other people's jobs from that regard and proactively looking at it and seeing how, searching out for ways to make themselves better. And then also kind of to the cultural components of that, having groups that are not executive leaderships hold and host those types of information. I know as the vice president of our office, sometimes my ideas aren't always as in favor as like the team's ideas, right? So having the team kind of lead those conversations to provide the feedback to me is very important. And I know that the ones that have done it best from my client perspectives are the ones that have people in different departments or groups kind of heading up those types of cultural and developmental programs so they can solicit the feedback to have the appropriate communication for those people to find what path is most beneficial for them. And the last thing I'd add to that is that continuous conversation. While we may feel that somebody is a great fit for this particular open role, there may be circumstances around their personal life that the timing just isn't right. However, communicating to that person that, hey, you'd make a great fit in this role. However, I can appreciate that this isn't the right time. However, don't forget that we're looking for and want to work with you in developing your skills for job advancement in the future is also critically important.
It seems like that transparency is a great thing to include in the hiring process, being open to the conversation about what, the person's goals are. And so I appreciate that reminder. And Brian, I have a kind of, just kind of to pull together some of the different thoughts we've had so far, just about how all of this plays into that recruitment and hiring process. I think you've worked with nonprofits before, partners before, on sort of what you call like the total compensation package. So it like it's not just wage, but it's looking at all these things that we've just talked about and how you communicate that. Any thoughts you want to share with the folks on the call today about how, what that means? What is that overall compensation package going to include, and how that helps with the value proposition during the hiring process and communicating that value? Any advice you have on that?
Absolutely, yeah. As Trevor may alluded to, over 85% of the clients that we work with at Mutual of America are in the nonprofit sector. So this challenge of finding wages or competing from a wage standpoint has been going on forever in our industry, and specifically with Mutual of America and our clients. So this isn't anything new from that regard. It's gotten much more competitive, obviously, in the last year or so in that regard. But working in a total compensation benefit communication with some of our different groups is really about the communication, letting people understand and know what that hourly wage is, but also if you're providing additional benefits like healthcare, really kind of putting a dollar amount to what that healthcare kick-in is from the employer standpoint, letting them know this is what it's costing us to have you as an employer, and this is what the benefit is of all these healthcare provisions. And the same would be said from the retirement planning standpoint. We often ask people that have, for example, matches on their retirement plan that are not taking advantage of this, who would like a 1% or 2% or 3% raise in their compensation? Take advantage of the employer's matching gift or matching contribution strategy in the retirement plan to take advantage of that and put a dollar amount to that with those individual people. And then also just sharing with them on a consistent basis what that looks like and how that changes. Clearly, what was going on from a healthcare cost standpoint 5 years ago when that person was hired may look much differently now than where they're at right now, or what that cost is right now. So sharing with them, hey, I'm sorry that we're not able to give perhaps a raise this year, but healthcare costs went up 20%. What does that look like? And again, transparency and communication from my clients' perspectives has always been vital in securing and retaining those high-valued employees.
That's great. Well, you brought up wages. Let's talk about wages. So Trevor, I'm going to start with you on this one, but this is a hot topic across the country right now, and unfortunately one that our industry has been grappling with for a very long time. Has the pandemic or other events of the past year or longer even influenced wages at nonprofits that you work with in the region or across the country? Any data you can share or trends you see?
Yes, certainly some, not necessarily hard data, but certainly trends from the meetings with our clients. And I would say it's all over the spectrum because, every nonprofit or cultural institution, museum, they've kind of been hit from the pandemic differently. I mean, we've seen our clients everywhere from the spectrum of, we've had some clients that we work with, get funding from the Mackenzie Bezos Foundation. And so now they're flush with cash. And so they're able to give raises or from some of the, pandemic assistance, not necessarily the PPP programs, but other funding programs that Congress has approved has provided more funding. So obviously that's one end of the spectrum that some of our clients are seeing. And so they've been able to give across the board raises to their clients or increase the match or base contribution that they put into their retirement plan. But then we also have other clients who might be in the boat of some of, the museums on the call today where, when people couldn't come to the museum, you had to close, like Andy said, all 6 of their funding programs, couldn't generate revenue. And so we've certainly had clients who, had no revenue other than, PPP programs coming in. And so have had to keep a hard line on what their wages were or even cut positions. So we've seen it all across the spectrum from our clients. And it really has boiled down to even, just looking at the state of Ohio, very, region based, because we have a lot of clients in, the Appalachia area down near Athens, Ohio, as well as, a lot in, the Columbus market in Ohio is very different from, down in Appalachia in terms of, what wages they need to pay and how competitive they need to be, just because the job opportunities are so very different. So it's very, very local specific in that aspect in terms of, rural versus, urban and things like that. But certainly wages are a big topic amongst our clients. And so we've been able to help, where they haven't been able to increase wages, we've been able to help find other unique ways, like Brian alluded to with the total compensation, whether that's improving the retirement plan, things that they can do on the healthcare side, other benefits they can provide if they aren't able to increase those wages.
Okay.
If I could interject real quick, another big trend that we've seen is that work-life balance and really kind of communicating that in a much more direct way, a lot more flexibility, kind of to Andy's point, as far as allowing their pets to come in, maybe having instituting some type of daycare or care program for their children at the facilities because of obviously the constraints around the pandemic and child care from that regard, allowing people to work from home at maybe untraditional hours, right? Maybe their job doesn't necessarily have them working from 9 to 5. Maybe what they're doing can be done in hours outside of the normal business day. So flexibility around some of those working conditions, and then kind of piling all that together to combat some of the challenges, obviously, from somebody moving down the street for $1 or $2 hourly wage difference.
It's so interesting. You mentioned flexibility. I feel like that's my favorite thing to talk about lately. But it's also a big question for museums, as many of them shifted to working online, and it worked fine in the past year. There's some flaws to it for, not necessarily in the productivity side, but just staff relationships. So a lot of people are trying to figure out how to work going forward with more of a, in-person, possibly hybrid, or flexible option. I don't know. Andy, is this something that you're even working through right now as far as flexibility of hours or where people work still?
It is. And it's always been something, I have a few employees that have always worked for childcare issues or whatever, non-traditional hours. And I tell most of my employees, we have a number of frontline staff that have to be here, right? Somebody's got to be at admission. Somebody's got to be in the museum store. Somebody has to be running our education camps. Those are in person and required to be here. And then I have a number who don't necessarily have to be here. and I tell them I don't care when they're here, as long as they're being productive. And, most of the time, those employees that were productive 2 years ago are just as productive now. The employees who might need a little nudge occasionally are the same employees who might have needed a little nudge occasionally 2 years ago, to be honest with you. I don't think the situation and, work from home changed the nature of good employees to bad employees or bad employees to good employees. I think the same employees thrive, whatever the environment, but I'll work with good employees to create an environment that works for them every single time.
And do you get feedback on that? Do employees appreciate that flexibility?
Yeah, I don't think there's any question. And, it's just not, it's not that important. Save for the one thing with our small teams, and I won't cite any examples or cite any departments, but if there's somebody who's here all the time, there isn't often a, you shout out the door, hey, what's this? What's that? And if you're one person's here all the time in one department with same job responsibilities and another one's not, that one who's here is more often than not going to be the, hey, solve a problem immediately person. So we have to guard against that. We have to be very careful about that and, making sure that we're not overburdening the people who are here. Yeah. And then one other note about that, I cannot stand brainstorming on Zoom. I think it's intolerable and horrible. I mean, some meetings, this works fine on Zoom. There are some meetings that are perfectly efficient on Zoom, but brainstorming ideas it just doesn't work in Zoom to me. So I'm so happy that we've got, our creatives back in the building, and, if we're masking again, socially distancing, but it's better in person than on Zoom.
Great. Now I want to just ask you the wage question. How has the national discussion of minimum wage affected your museum's conversations about the future?
Well, it is, when the federal government was looking at across the board $15 an hour, I don't think there's any employer in America that didn't look at their employees and weigh themselves against those. We certainly did. And, I wanted to make sure that all of our full-time employees were beyond that. I'll be completely honest, we do have some part-time employees that are short of that still. It's an always competitive hiring environment. Louisville Slugger Museum's across the street, Kentucky Science Center's down the street, Muhammad Ali Museum's down the street. We're all pretty aware of what others are doing because entry-level staff they're shopping and they're looking for those opportunities to maybe make a little bit more money when it's a summer job, or they're home from college, and their goal in being home from college is to make as much money as they can to get back to college. For those type of employees, quality of life and quality of experience here at the museum is not as big of a factor, to be completely honest.
That's really interesting. I saw at least one comment coming through, and I know they're not alone, that this has kind of been this is an issue for museums across the board. I'm sure, just thinking about minimum wage, and as Trevor was pointing out, some people may have the funding right now to start making changes and others don't. So beginning to build those conversations into their plans for the future.
I'll add that, if you can get ahead of it, and there's a couple instances in recent history where somebody has said something about said employee who, may have other opportunities or whatever. If you can get ahead of it, hiring's hard and it's costly and it's time consuming. If you have good employees and you can make concessions to try to make them feel valued and keep them on your team, it's a lot easier than starting over the process of hiring to replace them.
That's a great point. Well, I know we're kind of at time here, so I just want to ask one sort of closing question. I didn't see any other new questions coming through the chat either, but Are there any resources you've turned to or partners you've relied on in the past year that you'll continue to seek out as it relates to recruitment or hiring? Or that you maybe learned about? I know, Andy, you talked a bit about just hiring a more diverse staff. You get introduced to new resources and partners too. So any that you would put on your list of definitely,
I already answered, so I'll defer to Brian and Trevor on that. I named our new resources that we're using.
Yeah, I alluded to it previously, but I would say your staff, your employees are going to be hugely significant if you weren't using them for referrals in the past. I'd highly encourage you to use them. And our clients do the same thing. And then one of the other things is continuing to expand your network, whether you're the HR director, whether you're the museum president, or you're the vice president of Mutual of America. Expanding your network and centers of influence in the community, people who know people. It's whether you're a technology company, whether you're a museum, whether you're a financial services company, it still generally boils down to it's a people business. And so the more connections you have, the more interactions you have, the more people you can connect with, whether it's your staff or centers of influence, the more opportunities you're going to get to find those diamonds in the rough, those unique staff members, things like that, and always be looking. I don't currently have any open positions, but still talking to people about who might be looking or who could be in the future. So just because you don't need to fill a spot doesn't mean that you shouldn't still be looking and connecting with people or seeing who might be a good fit for your organization.
I like that
Conversely, I
reminder.
have 2 open spots. If anybody's on the line that's interested, I actually put a concerted effort, at least 2 to 3 hours a week of reaching out to, as Trevor mentioned, centers of influence, people that I know, I like, and trust, to sit down with them or reach out to them in a concerted effort, communicating what is open and really asking them not to necessarily fill the spot for me or look for somebody that would match this role, but who's a good person, who are the right people from an ethics standpoint, from a cultural standpoint, that could potentially fit in that regard. I'm a firm believer that with the appropriate coaching, you can kind of learn some of the different nuances that make people, whether it's in my industry or anybody else's industry, successful. It's hard to teach those kind of core values to certain individuals, I feel like, and by sitting down with those people that you do have in your center of influence and circle of trust there, to reach out to and just have those conversations, that's where I think is one of the best and least sought after opportunities from a connection standpoint.
Well, I love the reminder to lean on your networks, obviously, as one ourselves. We know the value of that, but are there particular networks that you all connect with, or your nonprofits are connecting with regularly locally to
So for us, go ahead, Andy, I'm sorry.
We have a number of organizations that I'm involved with, like Museum Row on Main or the Main Street Association. I'm a part of the Louisville Downtown Management District Board. I'm also a high school lacrosse coach. And so I've got networks outside of my networks, but all those, when you're looking for sponsors, you'll work, you'll coach the daughter of one of the people who runs a bank. And so those, I think that Brian and Trevor, Charity closed it out really well with that networking is crucial. It is so important to what I do every single day. And I am shocked at how often the answer to my problem is somewhere in my network.
Yeah.
You'll be laying in bed and go, dang, that person. And, for instance, this beer festival that we're running right now, we had somebody who was going to manage that, and she took another full-time job. And I'm just sitting there thinking about an ad executive who worked at Summit Media, who 2 years ago told me that she ran the Highlands Beer Festival. And she's now powerhousing her way through this beer festival that ends on that's on Saturday here at the museum. Organized 200 different brewers. There's going to be 300 beers to taste. There's vendors, there's stages, there's music. It's a big undertaking. And that came out of my network. Phone call, Are you interested? Yes, let's go.
Wow, nice. Well, I do want to go ahead and wrap us up here. Thank you, Andy, Brian, and Trevor for your time today. And I'm glad everybody was able to join us, and for the great questions. We thank you. Thanks for the comments too, and positive feedback. Complicated topic. We know that it's different for everyone, but glad you were here to listen with us today. Thanks so much for joining, and we'll follow up with you later with a recording and some takeaways.
Thanks, Charity. Great job moderating.
Yeah.
Yes, thank you. Great job, everybody.
Thanks, everybody.